Hello, Professor Carthorne, and this was my attempt at the final for Introduction to Python. I believe you said in the instructions that it was a suggestion to make functions and kind of use that portion to clean it up. I kind of just looked through and tried to see, in essence, what was necessary within the program or what I could take out and put into a shorter section of lines, like just to find a way to more optimize it, less clean it up, I suppose. And then I used a lot of, or at least a fair portion of commented out lines to basically just explain to me what the next couple lines in succession were going to be essentially completing as a task. So I kind of moved some things around. I moved up the Dave's Office dictionary because it's something that gets used early on, like enough, but I figured it's going to be a non-fluid number. It's something that is finite and set, so I decided that I'd move it up towards the top just to kind of keep that data locked in as to where it is. I didn't move the link or the opening to the file itself. As you can see, I commented out that this is essentially just used for entering the current time that you're in, which I believe it recommends Mountain Standard Time because the problem is set essentially in Chicago. It's essentially just set for the current search time, so it'll tell you, well, I guess actually later on it does that. This I was a little confused on. From what I understand, it opens up this file itself and just opens and closes it and reads it out. So in essence, you're getting the data that you need to complete the problem from the spreadsheet or the XML file that you provided to us. And then next, I did define this one, actually. This is the bus list itself. Originally, I believe it printed out the list of potential buses that were out on, I believe it's, yeah, like I said, Route 22 up here at the time that you search it, which I kind of messed around, and as I was running it, as you can see, I ran it a couple times, and it'll give me different data times. These were trial and error runs, but that was just something I was tinkering around with towards the end. But essentially, it would give you the data associated, or tell you essentially what buses are on that route at that time. But I assumed that based on the purpose of the problem, which was to find the suitcase, you don't necessarily need to know every bus that's on Route 22. You only really need to find the buses that are more likely that are going to have the suitcase on the bus. So I defined this one out so it wouldn't print every single time with the data, just for the sheer fact that it essentially isn't necessary information. It's a list that I would assume you want to use to pull from to get the information that you want, which would be down here, the candidates list. And the candidates list essentially is the list of buses that were based on data that's given within that time period that you search, which direction they're heading, which specified they wanted it northbound because that's the direction of quote-unquote Dave's office, and it gives you the latitude and the longitude of the bus, which will give you an exact position of the bus and where it is. And finally, it will print out the distance, which distance, as valued here, is the distance from the bus to Dave's office. So, I mean, which would be useful information if you're trying to catch the bus. Like, you want it to be as close as possible, so that you can get to it in time. And then from here on, I kind of just neatened some like little things up. There was a function, I believe, down here. It said for I in candidates list, and essentially all it was is it was replacing and creating a new version of the list that would have, instead of the multiple dashes, it would have commas. But um, I figured I could just eliminate that entirely and put that information up here instead of replacing it. Just initially put it that way, which would neaten it up a little bit more, make it look a little bit prettier. So when it comes out, it's a lot more simple to read. Um, I added a print that just kind of just gives the user a little bit more functionality to the fact of it. It kind of just makes it easier on the eyes to see what information you're getting as an output. Um, and this was the data sheet you were talking about. I believe you mentioned there was a portion of extra credit that you could use to say like what we could use this data for. Or no, that wasn't the extra credit portion. But what we could use essentially that data for is what he actually mentioned in the video. That was he almost made a joke about it, essentially, that based on the distance and times of these buses, you could figure out what bus drivers are driving too fast, how long it takes them to get to certain locations, which in turn for the bus system of the city of Chicago could become useful information. I mean, if you have a bus driver that is driving too fast or too slow, or if someone's missing their times when they're getting to certain routes that they're supposed to be on, I mean, that could be useful information they could put towards, changing personnel, or, talking to personnel and making sure that, like, people are making, I mean, because the buses are essentially what gets people to work on time. So it's important information that actually could be used for a very, very strategic purpose. But in this case, it was essentially just used to find a man's suitcase. I'll run this program just so you can see and confirm that it is still functioning in the proper way that it is supposed to. I'll give a random time. Let's say it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, which I believe would be 14. And these are the two candidates. So instead of, as I said before, instead of giving me a list of every single bus on Route 22, I don't need to know that information. I just need to narrow it down to what buses I need to try to get to, because they would be the most likely to be on my suitcase to be on. So I just felt this output was a little bit more pretty. It was more concise, just to the point about what you needed to get. And I can verify to you that this out data file is working. This is a bunch of the compiled data that I used, which if I wanted to, I could sort it by the bus ID number, and I could figure out its position at certain times, and like I said, to help me find the to make sure like the bus is getting to certain positions, yada yada yada, at certain times, which would be, I believe, useful to a city bus system. But that would be essentially my take on the final. I hope it was as successful as I feel it is. I feel like this is a lot neater and concise, and I feel that for the most part I was able to read through it and generally understand what it was saying at certain points and what it was attempting to accomplish. And that should do it for my final. Thank you very much.